Hello, my name is Haseebah and welcome to 100 Stories Deep. Today I am reading The 1000 Nights and One Night, retold by David Walser. So here is the cover. I've chosen this book because it's a number of stories within one story, and it has themes of fantasy and a kind of like dreamlike quality, and being an illustrator myself, I really enjoy storytelling. And it contains one of my favourite stories, so Aladdin and the Lamp, which is the origin of Disney's Aladdin. But today I won't be speaking about Aladdin and the Lamp. I will be reading the first chapter, which explains kind of the rest of the stories and the origins of this. So this is The 1000 Nights and One Night, and I will be reading The Teller of Tales, Shahrazade, the First Night. And within this story, it has a lot of beautiful illustrations. So I'll be showing you these illustrations whilst I read. So here is the first double page spread. Okay, so The Teller of Tales, Shahrazade, the First Night. There was once a powerful king in India who died and left two sons. Shahryar, the elder son, took over the kingdom and sent Zaman, his younger brother, to be Shah of Samarkand. Both of them married and became model rulers, beloved of their peoples. After 20 years had passed, King Shahryar longed to see his brother again, so he sent his wazir, the chief minister, with precious gifts of horses bearing gem-encrusted saddles and white slave Mamelukes to ask his brother if he would make the long and arduous journey to see him. Shah Zaman was as delighted with the gifts as he was by the invitation, and within 3 days he had set his kingdom in order, preparing to make the journey. On the night before his departure, he said farewell to his wife and joined the expedition in camp just outside the city, ready to leave at dawn. Then, in the early hours, Shah Zaman remembered that he had left behind a most special gift he had set aside for his brother. He rose from his couch and went back to the palace. As he quietly entered his rooms, in order not to wake his beloved wife, he found her in the arms of a slave. And here is the next illustration. The Shah drew his scimitar and cut the two into 4 pieces with a single blow. He then returned to his encampment and gave orders for an immediate departure. Shah Zaman told no one of what had happened, but as he journeyed on, day by day, his health and spirits declined. How could my wife do this to me? He kept repeating to himself. By the time his brother came out to welcome him, he was the shadow of his former self. King Shahryar asked what ailed him, but received no reply. So when they reached the palace, the king insisted on summoning the most skillful doctors to treat him. A month later, there was still no improvement in his brother's health. The king suggested a hunting trip, but Shah Zaman politely refused, so the king went without him. When the Shah was alone, he sat by the window of his room, which overlooked the king's private garden, brooding on how his wife betrayed him. Suddenly he saw a gate in the wall of the garden began to open. In stepped 20 slave girls with the queen, his brother's wife, and a model of loveliness. Shah Zaman drew back as to not be seen as they passed under his lattice window on their way to the fountain that played into a great pool of water. As they removed their veils, it was clear that 10 of them were not slave girls at all, but male Mameluke slaves. Worse still, jumping down from a tree, a large slave walked boldly up to the queen and embraced her. At sunset, the Mamelukes resumed their disguises and everyone left the garden. Shah Zaman concluded that the betrayal his brother had just suffered was even worse than his own, for his brother was the king and the most important person in the land. Struck by this thought, Shah Zaman's melancholy began to lift. The king returned 10 days later. He was quick to notice that the change in his brother, but despite his entreaties, Shah Zaman would at first only agree to tell him the cause of his depression and not the reason for his recovery. The king said to him, "Brother, you have to tell me how you got over such a calamity." Reluctantly, Shah Zaman told him the whole story. When the king heard how his own wife had betrayed him, he was so enraged that he had put her to death, together with all the slaves who had been with her in the garden. He swore that from that day on, he would take a new bride each night and have her put to death the following morning. In this way, he would never again risk being betrayed. Shah Zaman went back to his city with the same resolve. And so from that day, as each night fell, the king's vizier had to produce a beautiful maiden to spend the night with the king, and in the morning have her put to death. This continued for the space of 3 years, until all the mothers who had not yet lost their daughters had taken them out of the city into hiding. Only the vizier's only 2 daughters, Shahrazad and Dunyazad, were left. Imagine the vizier's misery when Shahrazad said she would offer herself for the next night. Shahrazad was a maiden of exceptional ability. She had read all the books she could lay hands on and was steeped in the legends of the past. She had studied the works of philosophers, scientists, and poets. She was pleasant, wise, and witty. She was also the apple of her father's eye, but she would not be changed in her decision. In despair, her father said to her, "If you do not change your mind, I fear the same thing will happen to you that happened to the ass." "And what was that, father?" said Shahrazad. And so her father told her the story. The tale of the ox, the ass, and the merchant. A merchant rich in land and livestock had been told by Allah how to understand the talk of animals on condition that he did not share the secret with anyone else. Should he do so, he would die. One day the merchant was sitting near the stalls playing with his children when he heard the ox complaining bitterly to the ass. "Look at you in that clean, sweet-smelling stall. I am woken when it is still night, yoked and taken to the fields, where I plough all day in the boiling sun. I come back to a filthy stable, sore and hungry. While you eat your fill of fresh hay, I survive on crushed straws." "More fool you simpleton," replied the ass. "When they bring you back to your filthy stall at the end of a grueling day, you bellow and kick the stalls, and they take that to mean that you are contented. You should lie down and refuse to eat your poor meal. When they yoke you for the day's labour, you should refuse to move. After a couple of days, they will think you are ill, and soon they will treat you a good deal better." "You are right, my friend. I shall do as you say," replied the ox. So the next day, in spite of being beaten thoroughly by the ploughman, the ox refused to pull the plough and lay down on the ground. When the ploughman took him back to the stable, he refused his fodder. The ploughman went to the merchant to report that the ox had fallen sick. "Take that rascally ass," said the merchant, "yoke him to the plough and work him hard." This is the next illustration. The ass had never been worked so hard. By the time he got back to the stable in the evening, he no longer had the strength to hold up his head. The ox, on the other hand, had enjoyed a peaceful day, lying in the stall, calling down blessings on the ass. The ox thanked the ass warmly on his return. "So, daughter," said the vizier to Shahrazad, "be careful that you don't suffer like the ass for lack of wits." But to the vizier's dismay, Shahrazad was not to be dissuaded. The next day, the vizier went sadly to the king to tell him of his daughter's decision. The king was much astonished, for he honoured and respected his vizier. He did not want to be the cause of Shahrazad's death, but he was not prepared to break his vow. Now, before Shahrazad went up to the king's bedchamber, she called her sister Dunyazad to her side. "Dunyazad," she said, "be ready. As the sun sets, I shall call for you. When you come, beg me to tell you a new story to pass the sleepless hours before dawn. I will tell a tale that will one day be the saving of us and turn the king from his cruel ways." And so it turned out. When Shahrazad was received by the king, she wept, and when the king asked her why she wept, she replied, "I should like to see my younger sister to take leave of her before the dawn." The king agreed, and when Dunyazad had come, she asked Shahrazad for a story, just as she had been instructed. The tale went on all night. As the cock crowed to announce the dawn, Shahrazad stopped her story. The king had listened enraptured and needed to know what happened next. So when the vizier came in to take his beloved daughter for execution, the king raised his hand to stop him. "Wazir, I wish you to leave Shahrazad for another night. There is something I want to hear." On the next night, Dunyazad came to her sister's bedchamber and begged her to continue her story again. When the king's permission, Shahrazad went on from where she had left off. But as the first cock crowed to herald the dawn, and the vizier came woefully to take his daughter to her execution once more, she stopped her tale. As on the previous morning, the king raised his hand. "Wazir, I wish you to leave Shahrazad for another night. There is something I want to hear." In this way, night followed night. As the shadows lengthened and darkness fell, Dunyazad came to her sister's side and asked her to continue her story. And so for 1,000 nights and one night, Shahrazad survived, and the tales of marvels that follow are just some of the stories that she told. So that is the first chapter done. And what the first chapter speaks to me about is a lot of courage, and how sometimes you can be so scared within a situation, but you learn from that situation, you make it your own. And Shahrazad was so proud of that moment and how she overcame that obstacle that she had. So what I want you to do is write down a moment where you felt really courageous or really proud of yourself, because especially during times like now, we don't have a lot of courage, and it's sometimes easy to forget the moments that we did have it. So write down that memory that you have and really be proud of yourself for that thing that you did, and always be kind to yourself, especially now. So thank you for listening. You can watch and listen to more stories in the 100 Stories Deep series if you subscribe using the link below. Thank you and goodbye.